week I attended Fantastic Fest and I was able to watch over 20 movies. So today I'm going to stop and rank all 23 fantastic films that I saw, from my least favorite to the best. So if you don't know what Fantastic Fest is, it's a genre film festival. That means it has lots of horror, lots of action, lots of sci-fi, foreign films, and they'll have prestige movies. Parasite, Knives Out, Jojo Rabbit played back in 2019, so they'll have prestige films. Last year they had Banshees of Inisherin, but normally the movies always have to have some sort of kind of twist to them that makes them a little bit weird, a little bit quirky, and it's all at one movie theater. So it's actually a really cool film festival because everyone that's in attendance, you're just bumping into them and talking to them all week long. Most years, Scott Derrickson, the director of Black Phone and Doctor Strange, is there, so he was just walking around, standing around outside, waiting to watch movies this year. And likewise, there's a bunch of other film critic people there. If you follow kind of film TikTok, if you know who Cinema Joe is, got to talk with him for a little bit. Perry Nemiroff, who I met at MegaCon, she was there, talked to her quite a bit, which was pretty cool. And then went with my buddy Cody Leach, and then a bunch of other kind of movie YouTubers, people in the space, just there hanging out, talking movies, and that's really, really cool. And one of the cool things about going back to the festival multiple years in a row is you start to make like festival friends. So in past years, I met like Sydney and Dylan, and then this year, we're like kind of hanging out and talking all week long. I will say that this year was a little bit more frustrating than the last couple of times that I attended. The ticketing was pretty messy. Like, it was a lot more difficult to get into the movies that you wanted to see. The film selection, I don't think was as good. There's plenty of great movies that I thoroughly enjoyed, but I didn't think it had quite as many of those like high profile, really cool films to play at the festival. And in particular, there weren't as many that played early. Like in 2019, I saw Knives Out 2 months before it came out. I didn't feel like we had anything like that this year. And then the theater we were at, that the festival's always at, got rid of its lobby a month ago to add an extra theater, which means between movies we were standing outside. Festival's in Texas. September in Texas, it's over 100 degrees, so you're standing outside. So there's a couple things about it that were kind of frustrating, but still great to see all these movies and see obscure things and foreign films, and then really great to just get to hang out with so many cool people, talk with them, and just have a great time. With all of that said, let's get started. In least favorite is Rage. This is a Mexican werewolf film, and honestly, I really hate that this is in the last place on this list, and it makes me want to do a tier list next year where I could phrase it a little bit differently, because the implication of putting the movie in last, I don't really care for all that much. But if I'm trying to make an honest list of which of these movies did I enjoy the most versus the least, which one am I most likely to rewatch or recommend, Rage is the one that I have to put at the bottom. And essentially it's a story where you're trying to figure out who in this family is the werewolf, who has done what exactly is going on. And then it plays out where essentially this dad takes his child into this gated community, and they're just kind of in isolation there, and people don't like them and don't trust them. It was just very slow. Not a lot happened in the first half. And then when things did happen, because they're trying to keep it a mystery of who is whatsy and who's doing what, it doesn't show all that much. And so for me, I didn't get much out of it. Now, when they did the Q&A afterwards with the director, someone in the audience said they were crying the entire movie because they just connected with the family dynamic of the father with his child, and the different ways different cultures kind of struggle to relate to their children and the societal expectations and things like that. I didn't connect with any of it. The specific cultural context maybe was lost on me. So it just felt kind of like people in a very isolated location just walking around looking at each other for 45 minutes. So for me, this one just didn't have anything that I connected with. But like I said, someone else in the room said they were crying the entire movie. And that's what's cool about Fantastic Fest, is that they are a lot more niche. They are more specific, and they're not movies designed for the broadest possible audience. And so you really experience different ways that films connect with people. And so that's the fun of it. The movie that's in last for me is someone else's favorite that they just connected with on a deep emotional level. That's why I hate to put it in last, but I didn't connect with it. I found it boring. 22, In My Mother's Skin. This is a Filipino possession story with a lot of influences from Catholicism and their kind of local traditions and lore. And on that level, there's some interesting ideas in here of showing how different cultures take kind of a familiar premise, a family member is possessed, and how they explore that. So much like Rage, where I don't want this one to be this low on this list because I find it interesting, but I didn't specifically connect with it. It has a lot of ideas that if the premise is it's set at the tail end of World War II. And so there's a lot of kind of historical context about how people are surviving, what the Japanese soldiers are doing. And then the kind of possession aspect ties into it, whether there's a connection with the dad and his connection to the Japanese and some gold, and you don't know quite exactly what's going on. And then the way that kind of the possession takes place is almost like a fairy tale, nightmarish fairy tale plays into it. And so when I describe it that way, it probably sounds kind of interesting. The way it played out, once again, was kind of slow and just not enough happened for me. Just kind of took a long time for things to play out. And sometimes it's also a little bit tricky on these because when you watch 4 or 5 movies in a day, your patience for films can be lower. So maybe if I'd watched this one at a different time in the day, it would have played better for me. But I felt myself watching it thinking the ideas here are much more interesting and compelling than the execution. Like this idea of maybe there's gold in the house and there's Japanese soldiers around hunting people down. There were so many opportunities to do things with those ideas, and it's just like very minor things that I felt like were much more compelling than what they did with the concept. So another one where perhaps I would have played differently. I don't know. Just I don't like to put movies like this at the bottom, but it wasn't one that I got much out of or enjoyed all that much. 21, VHS 1985. And I'm not sure if the VHS franchise just isn't for me or if I've chosen to only watch VHS movies at the absolute worst possible time. So last year, VHS 1995, whichever year it was that was last year's edition, also played at Fantastic Fest. I watched that one there as well. Both of them were fairly close to the bottom of my lists, but also with both of them, I watched them at midnight screenings. So after a day of watching lots and lots of movies at midnight and eating junk food at a theater, sugar, grease, all sorts of stuff that's not maybe the best for you, doesn't necessarily sit the best inside of you. So I do that, and then I watch a VHS movie after midnight. Camera's doing this, jitter, shock, all the things that they do to give the vibe of VHS, while you're not feeling great in general and very tired. Both years, I literally felt nauseous watching these movies. There's always ideas in them that I find interesting, but as a whole, I didn't really care for either one of them. This year, there were a couple of segments that were kind of interesting. The one from Scott Derrickson, director of Black Phone, director of Doctor Strange, and one of the, I think, people that worked on the VHS franchise all along and producers on it. He had a segment that was kind of cool, kind of interesting, but it kind of felt like this could be just a movie in and of itself. And there's one about some people that kind of go out to a lake and then bad things happen to them. And it teases some really cool stuff of where things are headed. And then it just cuts off, right? As I'm like, oh, that's interesting. It cuts off. And there's a reason for that. And you do get a follow-up in a sense, but the way they did it left me feeling like, oh, I wanted more of that. So for me, the VHS franchise, based off the 2 that I've seen, not for me. Maybe the problem is I'm watching them at midnight screenings after eating junk food and watching multiple other movies in the theater that day. But as of right now, these are only strikeouts for me. 20, Dogman. This is the new Luc Besson film. It does not have distribution yet, and this is one of the secret screenings. So at Fantastic Fest, they have secret screenings where you don't know what you're going to see. And you walk into it, and surprise, it could be a prestige film. It could be a mainstream film. You never know. So one of the other So a couple of the other ones that they had was Saltburn, a more of a prestige film that Film Twitter's going to love. One of the other ones was Saw X, about as mainstream as a film as they played in terms of horror and things like that. Last year, the secret screenings were Werewolf by Night. We were the first audience to see it. We got to see it in a theater, and the new Hellraiser. So this year, there was a lot of anticipation. What is the secret screening going to be? There weren't as many kind of big, high-profile films, so we had a lot, like maybe it's going to be Exorcist. Walk in, and they say, it's Dogman, the new Luc Besson film. And everyone in the theater is like, what are they trolling us? What is this movie? Like, we didn't even know what they were talking about. Like, I know who Luc Besson is, but like, this movie doesn't have buzz surrounding it, chatter. It played at a film festival like a month ago, and I didn't see anyone talking about it on Twitter. The movie plays, and it's bizarre. If you watch the trailer, you'll think it's about kind of this drag queen mafia boss that uses dogs to attack people and gets in fights with dogs and communicate with dogs. And that's so weird, it's almost interesting. And that's a part of this movie. But I watched the trailer and I was like, they're just pulling from like 3 scenes in the movie. There's a whole other hour and 15 minutes that's not this stuff. And you're watching it, and this person is arrested and they're being interviewed, and then it kind of goes Forrest Gump of like following this person from their childhood and their abusive father. That it's horrifying, but also parts of it play like Simple Jack from Tropic Thunder. And we go on this big gigantic quest where we're going to college and we're exploring like drag queen theater and being a singer. And then there's the crime side to it. It is all over the place. When it does the dog stuff, the dog mafia boss stuff, you go, I think that's a movie that is so bizarre that I might have loved. But it's only like 15, 20% of the movie. And then there's the whole hour. Like, watching the trailer, I was like, the whole middle hour of the film, that's all this other stuff, the Forrest Gump wandering around stuff, it's not in the trailer. And that's what most of the movie feels like, not dogs doing Home Alone, taking out guys with shotguns. That's what the trailer teases it as. That's not really what the movie's like. So for me, I didn't care for it. But it's another one where I got on the Facebook group about it, and there are people saying, that's my favorite movie of the festival. Wow, it's just perfect. It's so wild, crazy. It's so tragic and sad. I was like, okay. I'm glad you got stuff. But it's a mixture of Joker, The Godfather, Forrest Gump, Luc Besson, action from the 90s. I mean, it is so many things mixed together. So some of you are going to love this film because it's so weird and bizarre and such a strange mixture. And then after the movie played, they did a Q&A with Luc Besson, who was in France, and he's in Paris and has like one of those famous arches right behind him as they're doing the Q&A. And there was like technical difficulties so for like 5 minutes, he's going like this, trying to like confused. It was such a surreal, bizarre moment. 19, Pet Sematary Bloodlines. This is the new Pet Sematary film. It is a prequel to the remake that talks about the Judd's backstory that he kind of tells in that movie. It's the anecdote of when the Pet Sematary was used when he was a young person. Real nice cast here. Very generic. I already did a review of it. I'm going to do a Pet Sematary ranking, so I don't need to talk about it too much here. The director was in attendance, and so they did a Q&A, so that was kind of cool, but I just thought it was too generic. The big emotional gut punch is kind of the central premise of what would you do? How far would you go? That's lost in this film, and it's kind of replaced with action movie tropes and jump scares and kind of generic zombie stuff. So it's totally watchable. I don't think it hurts the franchise. It's just not particularly interesting or memorable. To be perfectly clear, this is probably the line right here where I enjoyed all the films above on this list. That even the ones that I'm going to talk about being a little bit negative on, I appreciated that I saw them. I was like, that worked for me for what it was, even if I have some issues, especially with the next few that I'm going to talk about. But this is the line. Everything above this, I'm going positive. 18, Where the Devil Roams. This is another example of a movie that putting it side by side with Pet Sematary Bloodlines is just kind of bizarre to me, because Pet Sematary Bloodlines, this is like a big studio film with a budget, movie stars, and part of a franchise based off Stephen King. Where the Devil Roams is a movie that is truly an independent film. just this family up in New York that like to make movies. And so the husband, wife, and daughter wrote it, directed it, acted in it. They wrote the songs that are present in it. And so it's a true indie film. It's a categorically different from giving someone $10, $20 million to make a Pet Sematary film. This is like people $50,000 at the, I don't know, I have no clue what the budget was, but someone asked them like what cameras they used, and it was like a Canon D5 or something. A camera that is not much better than the one that I'm using right now. And they shot this movie. So, but I'm trying to have to give my fair analysis here. I would say I respected the movie more than I thought it worked as a whole. Visually, there's all sorts of cool images in here. So much of it feels like a mid-90s Nine Inch Nails music video. And parts of the film are music videos. Like, it'll just kind of cut into a song where the characters are singing, and it goes full music video mode of like cool, creepy imagery, cutting between things. And so, like, they have a great eye for images and creepy stuff. But the film, it takes like 30 minutes before you even know what the plot is. Like, it kicks off and there's like a guy reading a poem, and then you're at a freak show and you don't know who the lead characters are. You don't know how anyone's connected to anyone. And like someone goes shopping at a store and there's like a cold open of someone murdered in a house. And you're like, I don't know how any of this goes together. And about 30 minutes in, it clicks and you're like, oh, we're following this family. And as soon as the plot kicked in, I was like, oh, I kind of dig this. They're endearing. All right, cool. And then it does some montage stuff again and a couple of music videos, and it kind of ends on a note. It was like, oh, okay, I see how you pulled it all together. But it wasn't a cohesive story, and it didn't flow particularly smoothly. It was very confusing for the first 40%. It took a long, long time to figure out what on earth I was supposed to be paying attention to, who was whatsy in the film. And maybe if they tied that together, it could have been significantly higher up on the list because the visuals are so cool. There are these memorable lines in it. It is creepy. And like, I appreciate the ambition, and it's so cool that they're able to just do this. But as a whole, I think it needed to be like another pass on the script to kind of clarify like a tight, cohesive story rather than a montage of creepy images, then kind of a plot kicks in, and then back to creepy images and music videos. And I really mean that, music videos. Like, they're singing, and it's just cutting between random shots of stuff happening. That happens about 3 times in the movie. So, make of that as well. Next up, Suitable Flesh. This was an interesting one. It was the next to last film that I saw. I didn't know much about it going into it other than the word body swap, H.P. Lovecraft, and Heather Graham. That's all I went going into it. And there's not a clean, simple way to the basic way to describe this movie is if you merged together like late night Skinamax from the 90s with H.P. Lovecraft, except everyone is fully clothed. If you know what Skinamax was back in the 90s, but they're fully clothed. So it's like, it wants to be trashy, an erotic thriller, but also doesn't want to be trashy at the same time. And so there's a lot of sex in this movie, but everyone is fully clothed all the time. But then it's an H.P. Craft body swap story. It is a weird blend. And I feel like if it had committed to any one direction, it could have moved up a good bit, because you get this bonkers performance from Heather Graham as this woman that gets wrapped up in this body swap stuff, tied in the creepy H.P. Lovecraft monsters and things like that. There's this lore there, but it's like too sexual without actually playing to that audience fully. Like it does like the perfectly wrong mix. I would say, of that. So it almost hurts it. Like, either have less of this or just go all in and play to that. But this was like, are you just trying to tease everyone? What are you going for with how like raunchy this is while not being raunchy at the same time? So there's no way to describe that without saying it that way. That's like, I'm confused as to what you're doing. Like, what category you want this to be in light of how you did all of this. But there's some really creepy stuff. As you move into it, it's appropriately like disturbing at times. Very weird genre blend on it. 16, Enter the Clones of Bruce. Now, this is a documentary about all of the Bruce Lee knockoffs that emerged after his sudden and tragic death. So I'm a big, gigantic fan of martial arts films, Hong Kong cinema. I've, read a biography on Bruce Lee. And so this is subject matter that interests me. And I enjoyed this. It was nice. It was fine. It didn't blow me away, but it did exactly what I kind of expected it to do. It's just kind of give you a picture of how beloved Bruce Lee was, how much demand was created for more Bruce Lee, and then the supply was cut off as soon as the demand skyrocketed. And this bizarre culture that emerged of knockoffs of him that came afterwards and all the ways that it played out. Some of it's really interesting, but it's super niche, super duper niche. It's pretty repetitious that once you hit a certain point in time, it just starts to, and then here's the guy from Korea and here's the guy from Japan. And it shows you examples of what they did, what made that particular branch unique, and how the actor responded once the fad ended, and how they respond to their legacy in film being copying Bruce Lee. So it's a bit repetitious. It's definitely not going to be for everybody, but if you're really into Bruce Lee and the culture of martial arts films and how it kind of expanded, it's definitely worth checking out. 15, Triggered. This is a Filipino action film, and super gory and violent. At Fantastic Fest, every year, they normally have 3, 4, 5 movies that they promote them as, this is going to be, and then they list off a country's The Raid. This is going to be Malaysia's The Raid. This is going to be The Raid of the Philippines. They always have that. And this was one of those movies. And so you go into it just expecting a wild, crazy, violent action film. And that's exactly what this is. That it plays a little bit like Die Hard at a factory. And that's going to be a recurring theme we're going to get into on several of these action movies on here. Die Hard at a factory. And with a guy that basically has PTSD. And he's trying to save this woman being tracked by drug lords. As an action movie, it's fun, chaotic, violent. I don't think it had any one particular thing that made it stand out, though. And so that's why it's kind of lower on the list, because a bunch of the other films, they at least had a cool style to the way the action was choreographed or something like that. Whereas here, it was good. It was well done. Lots of practical explosions and things like that. But it even in the Q&A afterwards where they were talking, we just didn't have the money to do long shoot and intensive choreography, so we did the best we could with what we had. And you feel that it's a passion project. They went all in, but they also didn't have the time to really do some of the more intricate stuff other films on the list were able to do. So it is good if you're looking to see how different countries do action. Perhaps check this film out. It's pretty mainstream, straightforward type of storyline, so it's pretty easy to follow. The Last Video Store. This is a Canadian film that essentially is about I don't even know what you'd call it, a mythical VHS tape that when you play it, the characters in movies come to life. And so basically this girl returns some videotapes, and in the back that her dad had, and in it is this mythical tape, and she's there with this weird, quirky video store owner of this indie, old, the last video store out there, and when they play the tape, characters from the movies she returned come to life, and plot points from one of the movies happen, so they're stuck where they're at. So that's kind of the basic idea here. And for me with this movie, it felt like this would have been a fantastic short. It doesn't work so great as a full-length movie. And what I mean by that is because their budget is so tight, it's all at this one place. They're always in this video store that's not huge. And so when you have kind of a Jason Voorhees type character pop up, show up, and chase them around, and there's only 2 people, it's not like you can have a big body count here. It's not like there's a lot of variety in what you can do in this one location. So it's a setup that only works for very quick novelty of introduce the concept, have one struggle, final showdown, credits roll. That's about as much as you have here, but it's 90 minutes long. So I don't think it fully works at that level like there's a lot of funny humor in here, there's some clever spins on if you're familiar with a lot of these 90s direct-to-video films, 80s slashers, all that stuff. There's a lot of great love in here for those. So it worked well enough for me on that level. But as a movie as a whole, not quite as strong as it might have been as a short film. 13, 100 Yards. This is a classic Chinese kung fu film. Period piece, all about competing for honor, to be the master, to lead the school in the future. Classic kung fu stuff with mesmerizing choreography, very cool stuff. As someone that in the 90s watched a ton of Hong Kong martial arts films, on a story level, it didn't necessarily do anything brand new. The specific choreography wasn't like the best thing I've ever seen, so it's not like one that I was like, wow, they're reinventing the martial arts. This is it. This is the future of Kung Fu. Wasn't anything like that. It's just a real solid Kung Fu film that as it goes along, especially the fights get better and better and bigger and more intricate in the choreography and more showcasing just how talented these guys are. I'd say the other thing kind of holding it back from being kind of in the top 10 is the story's a little bit confusing. Like, it's not super complex, but it is so culturally specific that it assumes that its audience understands certain societal structures and power hierarchies, so it doesn't explain things to you. It's very much made for a Chinese audience that know all of this stuff. I am not Chinese and do not understand Chinese culture of 100 years ago, so there's a lot of things where you're like trying to pay really close attention to try and track it. I still didn't quite understand why certain things happened, though it's a fairly straightforward, these two guys want to show who's best so they get control of the school. But as for the specifics of how the plot plays and what's going on, it was pretty confusing for me. But just in the mood for like cool kung fu, here it is. Check it out. 12, Crumb Catcher. This is an indie thriller about a newlywed couple that already have some tension in their relationship, some secrets already in there, and they go off for their honeymoon. And the tension between them, and they're like related to a book that the guy's writing, starts to already emerge. And then a guy that worked at their wedding shows up at where they're at for their honeymoon and won't leave and keeps trying to sell them something. It's a weird setup and premise, and it's even weirder in execution. Without going full wacky bonkers, it's just like this perfectly weird, creepy thriller about this guy that won't go away, and these secrets that each of them have, and why are they doing what they're doing. And so it's just really tense, edge of your seat, kept me engaged. It's the sort of film that's tough to even like describe exactly what it is or what makes it so compelling. It's there's parts of it get frustrating because you're watching it almost immediately. Like you're like, I think maybe the fundamental problem perhaps with this film for me is it never made it clear to me why this couple are together. So you have this guy that's writing a book about kind of his life, in particular his father, and he's an immigrant, comes from a rough background, and then she's like typical suburban white girl that works for a publisher, and she's the one championing him. So like that's kind of what pulled them together, but it's not obvious why the two of them would be so drawn to each other, and they clearly have big gigantic issues, and you only see them in a conflict phase that's also their wedding day. And so it was tough to buy into their relationship in the film. And I don't know what they need to do differently. During the Q&A afterwards, the director talked about how the basic starting premise of the whole thing was, what about if you had someone that was at their wedding, it's their wedding and they don't want to be there. And that's what started the idea of it, and how to like extrapolate that and turn it into a full film. But when it comes to the thrills, the weird, the creepiness, the guy that's trying to sell stuff is fantastic. He's like just like the perfect guy that can't take no and can't pick up on a hint and won't let it go, and it's just like so locked in on the insanity, and it's just pushing it. And so on all those levels, it kind of worked. Also, I thought I wish that the ending to it, I wish it wasn't crazy about the point that it chooses to end. It wasn't the most satisfying in light of some of the the journey that they were on with the characters and tension. It felt like they opened a bunch of doors that they never closed in ways that you're like, I needed that resolved right there. So I don't know. It's like, I might sound like I'm being negative. There's a quirky vibe to this that I really loved, in particular because the sales guy that's the couple, they're not bad, but I feel like the way that they're written, I didn't buy into it. That hurt some of the bigger stuff. The main thriller aspect did absolutely work. Number 11, The Toxic Avenger. This actually had its world premiere at Fantastic Fest, but I went to the festival with Cody Leach, and he didn't get a ticket to do it, so we ended up actually going to go to a press screening of The Creator that night and saw Toxic Avenger the next morning at a press screening at the film festival. So we missed out on a little bit of the fun there, but we still saw it before the trailer had even dropped for this movie, which is kind of an interesting scenario when you watch a movie before there's even a trailer for it. So if you don't know, Toxic Avenger is a Troma film from the 90s. My introduction to Toxic Avenger was actually Toxic Crusaders, the TV show adaptation of Toxic Avenger, which, if you know what Troma is, the idea that there's a children's version of Troma is bizarre because they're just ultra trashy, ultra violent, ultra politically incorrect. Like in the first 5 minutes of the original Toxic Avenger from the 80s, there's people in a car that just run over a kid for fun. And then when they see he's not dead, they back up over him and it does a close-up shot of the kid's head popping. That's Troma. And they decided to adapt that into a children's cartoon, Toxic Crusaders, which was my introduction, which made it very strange when I finally watched one of the movies. Like, whoa, this is different. Anyway, so I was curious, how do you do a Troma film? How do you do a Toxic Avenger film that's true to the original in a much more sensitive, politically correct context, which is now? And I feel like they did about as good of a job as you can do with that, of still being ultra violent and edgy without, like, there's a scene in the original one where some thugs try to, like, they kill a dog in cold blood, or they kill a blind lady's dog and then try to rape her in front of people. That's the original Toxic Avenger. You can't do things like that anymore. And it like stars Peter Dinklage, Kevin Bacon. Like, you got some big names in here, Elijah Wood. And so it's very much a more streamlined version that's more mainstream. It, by normal standards, it's incredibly edgy and crass. By Toxic Avengers standards, it's incredibly tame and streamlined. On a story level, they give it much more of an actual story with a character arc and development. It's a much slicker production on every level from the original one. Of course, bigger budget, better technology, because where we are in 40 years later. So you feel all of that. At the same time, the appeal, the charm of a 1980s Troma film is that it is this trashy, low-budget thing. So making a mainstream version of it, I think you lose the charm, and you just have this kind of crass movie. A fun crass movie, a fun ultra-violent movie. I enjoyed it, and at the same time, I only watched it a little, like a week and a half ago, and I don't remember a ton of, like, it didn't stand out to me that even the way some of these other movies that I watched at a point in time where my brain was way foggier, I don't remember as much about Toxic Avenger, and so it's good, it's enjoyable, it wasn't great. Kicking off our top 10, When Evil Lurks. This is an Argentinian horror film, possession film, where I talked about how In My Mother's Skin was a Filipino possession film, and I didn't quite connect with it. Both of these movies try to pull in local lore, a different, fresh perspective on possession from their culture's perspective and how they tell those stories. Both kind of integrate Catholicism in their own ways. For me, I thought When Evil Lurks was much more compelling, more interesting, drew me in much sooner, and worked much better for me. And so it's a possession story that plays a little bit like a zombie breakout story, with the way that it treats possession and how the possession spreads and the rules that kind of apply to it. It has a vibe of zombie outbreaks where people are trying to stop this thing from spreading. People don't believe them. And then there's sort of a breakdown of society that starts to take place. But it's all told through the context of really this one family and this man trying to save his family, reunite with his kids. It can be very graphic and shocking. Like when it starts off, you're like, there's some gross imagery, and then when it starts getting violent, it's very sudden, and you're like, okay. And then it's like, whoa, you're shocked at how quickly things escalate. So if you like possession films and want to see a new, different spin on one, be on the lookout for When Evil Lurks. It does have distribution. It's going to be released in October somewhere. You can look it up. But also, this is an important note. I believe this was Cody Leach's favorite film of the festival. Several other people said the same thing, that like this was the one that they loved the most. It's only at number 10 on my list. This is actually color coordinated. The top 10 are in green. That's the top category for me. So these are all movies I was like, oh, that was really cool. So even though it's at number 10, put it in the perspective of it's in the category of, oh, that was really cool. And a lot of people loved this movie. Now, Cody Leach saw it 4 days before I did. He didn't know anything. He went in cold and got surprised by this film that he loved. He told me I needed to go see it. So I watched it with more expectation, but I also watched it after I'd already seen like 18 movies in 5 days or something like that. So I was a little bit more burned out by the time I watched it. It's subtitled, so that can kind of also hurt the experience a little bit. So maybe that's even why it's a little bit lower than where like a Cody Leach has it. Like he was like, tell him this is the movie you got to go watch. Number 9, Saltburn. This was the first secret screening at the festival, and a movie that I knew virtually nothing about before I went into it. But as soon as they said the title, like I'd seen some positive buzz about it surrounding it on Twitter, and it's a movie that's a little bit tough to define because that's kind of what the movie does, is that it keeps redefining itself as it goes along. It's from the director of Promising Young Woman, a movie that was nominated for Best Picture a few years back. I wasn't crazy about that film, and I didn't even realize there was a connection there until after I had seen this film. I liked this one a good bit more. So it starts off and presents itself as kind of a love story of this guy that's infatuated with this guy at his college, but you're not sure, is he in love with him or is he just infatuated with the idea of him? And as it goes along, it turns into a movie about classism and how out of touch the elites are. And then it turns into this super bleak, dark film in other ways. It gets weird, super weird at times, kind of gross at times with where it does and this guy's infatuation and what that looks like. And it redefines itself about every 30 minutes, all the way up until the final minutes. It keeps giving you these twists that make you reframe it. It keeps changing the context where you're like, what on earth is going on here? You're the whole movie, you keep trying to figure out what is driving our lead character, what's really going on here. And it keeps revealing new things that you go, oh. And by the end of it, it's like this, you have this character that's incredibly layered and complex. A lot of people, once again, loved this one. We're just raving about it. I didn't love it. I respected it. I was intrigued by it. Sometimes it made me laugh. Sometimes it made me squirm. Made me feel a lot of things. I would say what I didn't feel all the pieces came together as a cohesive whole. Even as I left the theater, I was like, I don't know what I feel about that. Here we are. So I watched it over a week ago. I still don't know how, try to think about it. How do all these pieces fit together? Does this feel like a cohesive character with a journey that I understand, or does it feel kind of confused? Like there was a lot of ideas trying to be tackled and it doesn't fully come together. I think it's that last one, that there's few too many ideas that it's trying to do, few too many twists and turns that by the time you get to the end of it, it's like, I don't know if all that worked. I don't know if that's making as much of a statement or as clear of a characterization as it wants to be, because I don't see how all of this fits together, but it can be wildly entertaining. It is audacious. It's a bizarre watch. Number 8, One Percenter. This is a Japanese martial arts film. It's kind of like Die Hard on an island. Once again, Die Hard on a thing. And what kind of gives it kind of its own unique spin that makes it pop and stand out a little bit more so than, say, Triggered lower on the list, is the concept is it starts off where our lead character is this actor who had this big breakout film. that got him a bunch of headlines. And he became obsessed with the idea of reality and action films. So he started obsessing about developing a new style of fighting that he wanted to integrate into movies that was real. Jump forward 10 years, does it like literal time jump in the movie, and he's never been able to develop a follow-up movie. He's been trying to figure this out for 10 years, obsessing over it, but he's developed this super effective fighting style that he wants to make a movie. He goes to an island to scout footage to try and finally make his movie, and it turns out drug lords are there. And so then this guy that is trying to prove himself, he's on an island with some cameras and stuff like that, and he decides the best way to prove himself is to film himself taking out all these guys. So it's very self-aware, a lot of overt references to Die Hard, a lot of winking at the camera, some humor in there, this meta element of him like filming a movie called One Percenter, in the movie One Percenter. And then just beyond that, the guy is so fast. Like his arms, punches, he's so quick as he's doing all of this stuff. And so some awesome martial arts action. There's some really cool long shots that I don't know what they did, where the cuts were at, how much of it was like enhanced with CGI, but there's like shots of like the camera just like flying smoothly through this factory, circles around people, goes up a flight of stairs, and it's the sort of thing that I don't know what that like is. Did they have like a drone that was just flying through here? They had an awesome drone pilot that was able to like fly through the bars, railing bars or something like that. I don't know, but it looked awesome, and the choreography was absolutely on point during these shots. Other cool thing about this, the two leads of the movie were in the room with us, and so they literally did like a presentation where they like improv'd a fight and stuff in the room, and these guys are just so fast, and it was so cool. It's not breaking too much new ground in the action genre. It does have a clever enough spin on it that I had a really good time with this one. If you like action movies, want to try something a little bit different, once again, check out One Percenter. Number 7, Kill. This is an Indian action film. I tried to look up more details on it to see if it is specifically Bollywood or Tollywood or a specific studio. I couldn't quite find that, but it is an Indian action film, but very different from the typical Indian style, whereas it plays much more like a Hollywood violent action film than like Bollywood films that are kind of more genre blenders that are comedies, musicals, action movies, melodramas all mixed into one. This is like pretty much a straightforward action film with just a pinch of kind of classic Bollywood melodrama thrown into the mix. And I went into it hearing it was a bloodbath. This one is Die Hard on a Train, which is also a movie called Under Siege 2 came out many years back, starring Steven Seagal. It was also Under Siege on a Train. So it's Under Siege on a Train where this commando is trying to like save his fiancée from these terrorist guys that come over to take over the train to make money. And heard it was a bloodbath. And you watch the first half of the movie, there's blood, but it's not that bloody. It's a cool action car, like very like close corridor fighting. So but still fast moving and throwing people around. So they like make use of it. They're able to get a lot of it despite it being so tight corridors. And you get like halfway through the movie and something happens. You're like watching it. Something happens and you're like, oh crap. Whoa, what's going on with this movie? Halfway through the film is when the title card appears. I have never been in a theater before where the title card dropped and everyone was like, yeah, like started cheering, like it's about to go down. Like the best use of a title card, jump title card I have ever seen, because it's so deep into the film and it so obviously triggers like this movie's about to crank it up to 11. And it does. Like you're like legitimately watching like, oh, cool. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Whoa, it's about to get crazy in here. And it does. And the heads start getting smashed, the guts start getting ripped out, all the wild insanity, close quarters, and our lead guy is just tearing dudes to pieces, and it is wild. And it's a lot of fun. So I had a blast with this one. It wasn't, I'm not throwing up like, oh man, I didn't love it. I was like, when you have an experience like watching RRR where you just see something that's so wonderful, and this is like India trying to do kind of a more Hollywood type violent film. I was hoping that I could be like, this is India's The Raid. It's not quite that. Like, it's fun, it's ultra violent. If you like this genre, which I love this genre, it's a great one of these, but it's not like reinventing the genre. It's just a very cool ultra violent film. The bad guy in here, I thought he's like super charismatic as this horrible like maniac, but he's like super charismatic as this maniac. So he was a ton of fun in this one. But so yeah, anyway, this was one of the ones I went into and I knew I wanted to see because it's an Indian film and it's trying to do something different. And so I got what I wanted out of it. The Last Stop in Yuma. This is one that I knew absolutely nothing about going into it other than it said Yuma. And 310 to Yuma is a movie that I love, or movies that I love. So I was curious about it. And essentially it's kind of this indie film about, there's this gas station on the way to Yuma, 100 miles from anywhere, or in Yuma County, but it's 100 miles from anywhere, and the gas station is out of gas. And bank robbers come through town to get gas, and they have to sit there and wait for the gas truck to come. So everyone's just sitting there waiting, and some people figure out that there's bank robbers there. And so it's just kind of this tense situation of like, how are they going to survive? Will the bank robbers escape? What's going to happen? And they kind of like keep introducing new people, more people in the room, and you're trying to find out what's going to happen. What would you do in this situation? How would you respond if this happened? How would you get out of it? It has a bunch of these kind of different elements where it's like, and it's like a real witty script, a lot of just like little funny lines. And so while it's like very self-contained, it keeps it entertaining, keeps you on the edge of your seat, and doesn't overstay its welcome. So if you like kind of like tense bottle films, be on the lookout for this one. Speaking of tense bottle films, Your Lucky Day. This is one of the final roles from Angus Cloud, who passed away earlier this year. I believe he was on the show Euphoria. I'm not particularly familiar with his work, but that was kind of the buzz going into this film that, you know, it's one of his final performances, maybe his final performance. And essentially the plot of this one is that a group of people are in a gas station, and one of them scans a lotto ticket, realizes that they've won $156 million, and everybody wants that winning lottery ticket, so insanity breaks out. And after watching this one and Last Stop in Yuma County, there's a big discussion between a bunch of us as to which one was a little bit better, which one did we prefer, because they're both kind of tense films about people trying to get out of the situation with that what would you do kind of question to it. And Yuma is a little bit more fun, a little funnier, and I think it has the better first half. Your Lucky Day, I think, has the better back half. And I felt at the end of Your Lucky Day, I thought it was a more satisfying conclusion that was like, yeah, that was really good. I really dug that. Both of them are really enjoyable films. Like self-contained thrillers like this are my jam. And so we got a couple of really good ones, different flavor, but similar vibes to them. And what it does really well is as soon as you think we're heading down one path, it introduces a new element into it, a new faction trying to get the ticket, and kind of turns it on its head. And then it adds a new element to it that turns that on its head. And it's a movie where it's not obvious who the lead character is until you're really in over halfway through the movie, where it becomes which person is actually going to stand out as our lead. And as it does this, it's like, oh, and it's sort of movie where you feel like you're discovering the film as you're watching it in a way that for me was very satisfying. I mentioned some other movies lower on this list that I had that experience of like you kept discovering what you're doing. Some of those ones were maybe a little bit frustrating. This one was a very satisfying version of that, and gave us some really awesome characters. Final twist at the end that I was like, final reveals, final resolution. I went, yeah, I like that. And I almost like in the final moments, I was like, oh, you might have just ruined this movie for me. You might have made me hate this film. You could have dropped this movie 15 spots on this ranking with what you did, and then had one more and another one. You went, there it is. And I love watching a movie that's smarter than me, that gets me into the final minutes, and I think they've done something to infuriate me and all they did was set something up that I went, there it is. Yeah, you found it. You found the satisfying, interesting way to pull it all together that's consistent, and it's smarter than me. So once again, both of these ones, be on the lookout for them. I think most other people said they liked Yuma a little bit more. I could be wrong about that, but everyone seemed to be very positive on both of these ones. I like a movie that by the end of it, I'm satisfied at the end, and I think this one did that better. Yuma, I didn't love how it ended in the way certain characters perhaps were treated in a sense. I think it got meaner in the last third than it had been in the first 2/3. All right, real quick, the top 4 on here are all big studio projects. I feel like the idea of a film festival is more to discover the smaller stuff. The point of this video is really to talk about the smaller stuff. So if you're wondering of the actual small things, indie things, foreign things, My Lucky Day, that's the top one for me. As you move up onto the top 4, these are movies that had dramatically larger budgets coming from big studios, built-in distribution. They're categorically different from many of the movies I watched or referenced below. They're indie American films without distribution that were kind of self-financed or struggled to get the financing, or foreign films that don't have American distribution yet and they're trying to find it, or they got it from a different film festival. Top 4 on here, these are big mainstream things. So sometimes I wonder if I should just even leave those out of a ranking like this because they're just so different. That's not what this list is about. So just so we're clear, I have to give my honest opinion, and that's why I have to put like Rage and In My Mother's Skin at the bottom because they're not movies that I got anything out of. And likewise, I have to put these top 4 on top because they're the ones that I enjoyed the most, that I thought worked as a whole the best. But it's not very interesting to put mainstream things at the top. Fall of the House of Usher. Now, this one is even a stupid one to include because I didn't even watch the whole thing. I watched the first 2 episodes. I did get to see them on the big screen. This is the latest Netflix project from Mike Flannagan. It is based off the writings of Edgar Allan Poe, and it's really good. It's kind of about this family dynasty going back 70 years and how a brother and sister built up this gigantic company. And obviously it's about the fall and how things collapsed in the end. And the present timeline is the father, the patriarch of the family, being interviewed by a detective about what has happened recently about the fall. And then we're going all the way back to the 50s, to the 70s, 80s, kind of learning about it. And then in each episode, we're kind of tracking with one of his specific kids to see how this fall took place. So it works just as this story with compelling characters, built-in intrigue, witty script, fun dialogue. And then it also has the creepy Edgar Allan Poe side to it, where it's pulling from his works. And Mike Flannagan, I think, is really good at this stuff. And so it's just really good. It's really well done, compelling, interesting. On these other first 2 episodes, you get to the end of the second one and you're like, oh, I got to watch the rest of it now. And I have to wait, until it drops on Netflix in 2 weeks or something like that. But it really interesting stuff. And it was fun because I watched it with Perry Nemiroff. So it was like pretty fun to get to watch something like that with her and talk with her afterwards. So always fun when these people that you've interacted with over the internet, in the case of her, was reading her on Collider 10 years ago and gotten to know her over the last couple of years. So slowly making friends at film festivals. Pretty cool stuff. In third place, Totally Killer. This is Back to the Future meets Scream. It's very, very, very much in the vein of Happy Death Day, Time Loop Slasher, or Freaky Friday as a slasher. This is Back to the Future as a slasher with a whodunit, which would be Scream. And I thought it was an absolute blast. I saw the trailer for it and I went, that is right up my alley. I bet I'm going to really like that. And I did. If you're tracking with my channel, people ask me frequently, what's one movie you'd want to think should get remade? And I say the sacrilegious answer, Back to the Future. Every time I say that, people get furious with me. And I understand why. It's a perfect film. I love it. It's in my top 10 of all time. Beloved film. But my reasoning is the central premise. Modern day high schooler goes back and meets their parents when they were in high school is interesting in a new way every generation. 1980s high schooler going back to 1955 is interesting in a different way from a modern high schooler going back to the 1980s. And this movie proved my point. Now, or maybe this movie is the perfect compromise, that you're not remaking Back to the Future, but you are having fun with this concept of modern day, politically correct high schooler that's very socially conscious, very culturally sensitive, going back to the very culturally insensitive, casually racist 1980s. And it's fun. And it pokes fun at, like, the modern day high schooler is kind of obnoxious, and it frequently makes fun of how obnoxious modern day high schoolers can be. Roasts the 80s for just how unbelievably dense and mean everyone was, and just these subtle, just flippant racism tossed around, just roasts all of it, while also being a fun whodunit slasher. If you tell me you're going to give the Happy Death Day treatment to Back to the Future, I'd hear that and I go, man, I'm going to love that. That's right up my alley. And it absolutely was. I've actually already seen it twice. Watched it at the film festival, and then I watched it with a screener link at home a second time, which if I watch a movie back-to-back nights, that's a really good sign that I dug the film. So I really dug this one. I will say this, the actual final revelations of the whodunit aspect were not my favorite parts. The journey is more satisfying than the actual kind of resolution. And you get to the end of it and you're like, oh. And it's like a mixture of extremely predictable and impossible to figure out. Like, it's kind of both of those kind of happen at the same time in a way that you're like, why couldn't we average this a little bit? And instead of having something super obvious and something super impossible to figure out, have something right in the middle that you could actually piece together, that isn't super obvious, like just like that, right? But it doesn't really do that. So the final resolution feels rushed and not fully satisfying. The journey to get there, I had so much fun. Our runner-up, Saw X. This was the final secret screening, which was pretty stupid, if I'm being honest, because the secret screening was one day before the movie released wide, which is dumb. You don't go to a film festival to see a movie one day early. That's a peculiar thing to do. So I don't know why they didn't have it as the first secret screening as the opening night movie. I'm assuming the producers wouldn't allow that or whatever. But so it turned out we only saw it one day early. I've already done a review. I've already done a ranking. I don't need to say too much about it. This is my favorite Saw film. This is the one where it feels like they finally cracked the code. The original Saw film is iconic because it gave us this lore, gave us Jigsaw, iconic final twist, and that swelling music. Awesome. I think the movie's limited by its budget. Some of the acting is questionable, even from Cary Elwes, who's great in most everything else, but he only had so much time. Like, they had very limited shooting schedule for this film. And I think it shows. There were a lot of limitations. So I don't think it necessarily is great as a film. And I feel like this is the movie that finally captures all of it. And it's not like a big change for the franchise. It's not like it's reinventing everything. It's just like the slight tweak. Tell the story from Jigsaw's perspective. Let us see the people that he puts in the game from his perspective. And he's the most interesting character. He's the character with the most iconic performance. Make him the star. And that made all the difference. So this is my favorite of the Saw movies. It had everything I wanted from a Saw film, plus more emotion, which I wasn't expecting, and more humor, which I really wasn't expecting. And final film on here, The Creator. I debated not even including this one on the list because I didn't actually watch it at the film festival. I watched it in Austin press screening instead of seeing Toxic Avenger, but it played at the film festival. This is another one where it was just bizarre. They chose to play this movie 5 days after its press screening in Austin at the film festival in Austin. Bizarre, very weird. I have no clue why this wouldn't be the opening night film of the festival. I'm assuming once again the studio wouldn't allow them to have it as a real premiere. So then it's just like, yeah, you can play it late in the week. So it did play. Once again, I have a review for it already. This was my most anticipated film of the fall. It's original sci-fi epic. I got what I wanted. I don't think it's a new classic. I don't think it's a masterpiece, but it is like a very cool movie with awesome world building, cool action sequences, fantastic visuals, and a journey that I got invested in. And a movie where I felt like Where most movies, I'm like, that should have been shorter. This is one where I was like, that could have used like 15 more minutes to flesh a few things out. I was invested enough. I had enough patience. This is a story big enough, sweeping in scope and size. You could have given a little bit more time to flesh out the third act, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. In terms of ranking the Fantastic Fest films, it feels very weird to include a movie like this in the list. It feels very weird to include Saw X, because most of these, I'm talking about things you haven't heard of. That's what this list is about. But my honest opinion, what Fantastic Fest movie did I like the most? It was The Creator, so it has to come in at number 1, despite it being a big, wide-release film that is already in theaters. So there you have it. It comes in at number 1. If you enjoyed this video and want someone else's perspective on the festival, you can check out Cody Leach's ranking of the fantastic films that he saw. We saw a lot of the same films, but we saw different films, and then he watched several movies at home with the online version. So you'll get a different perspective on I don't know, 60, 75% of the movies that I saw. Plus, he'll talk about another 5 or 6 movies that I didn't get to see. So should be good companion videos to help you discover some new films and keep talking movies and TV too much.